I want to talk a little bit about this video I saw on YouTube about this family in northern Mongolia. They're the tsaatan people. They're nomadic reindeer herders, and it's about their life, their day-to-day life out there, braving the elements, the wild. They're taking care of their animals. And what was interesting was that they show their kids helping them out. And I'm thinking, well, these kids don't have to go to school because, probably you're like me, you grew up in the United States and you just went to school and you didn't know you had a choice. And so this apparently exists as well in Mongolia. And I was just a little bit surprised. And I did some research about it, how this came about. And actually, it's part of the United Nations and their efforts to promote, to have instituted human rights. And one of these human rights is the requirement for children to go to school, to have free education given to them by their national government. And so Mongolia actually has instituted that in their constitution and their laws to have compulsory free education for children. So let's watch a little bit of the video and then let's talk about the United Nations treaties and provisions that require this.
Yet, in recent years, the modern world has been catching up with them. The Mongolian government requires all children in the country to attend school from the age of 6. Now, during the winter, tsaatan families have to split up. Children and their mothers go to the only village in the region where the school is located, whilst the men stay alone in the taiga with the reindeer.
So there you go, directly from a family in Mongolia, that their child has to go to school. Let's take a quick look at actually where Mongolia is. Probably a refresher for most of us. United States. We're moving west towards Asia, and there it is, right in between Russia and China. And that's significant, as we'll see in 1 minute. So let's get a little bit of background on Mongolia. Here I am at the CIA World Factbook. And here's some background on Mongolia. Earlier, Mongolia was under the rule of the Chinese Qing dynasty. So here we are, Mongolia was under the influence of China up until 1911, when the Qing dynasty collapsed and Mongolia declared its independence, and then started getting help from the Soviet Union starting in 1921. And not surprisingly, it became a socialist state, having a lot of influence by Russia, so the Soviet Union. And here the CIA World Factbook calls it that it was a Soviet satellite state, heavily reliant on economic, military, and political assistance from Moscow. Probably that also, it wouldn't be surprising to know that their education system was also based on the Soviet model. Then the Soviet Union collapses in 1990, and then Mongolia then peacefully transitions to an independent democracy. 1992, it adopts a new constitution, establishes free market economy, and apparently has been an independent free state since then. And now it's not surprising that their education system is now following a more Western model, thanks to and that's why you see the significance of the location between Russia and China. They have been influencing Mongolia for quite a while, but now Mongolia is a completely independent state, and in fact has been a member of the United Nations since October 27th, 1961. Right, so let's get into it. The Mongolian government has declared that all their children shall go to school and it shall be free. And where did this come from? So, as far as I could tell, the earliest um, catalyst for this was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's basically a resolution adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations back in 1948. And it all started with a commission on human rights, and it was chaired by Miss Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt. And here it is. She was the widow, and she chaired the Universal Declaration of Human Rights drafting committee. So let's see what they actually drafted. Go to the text, and we go down to Article 26, and we'll see here that paragraph 1, everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. So there it is. This is the beginning of how this came about, how this child in that video has to go to school in Mongolia. It all starts right here. Okay, great. So now we know that everyone has the right to education, but this really isn't enough for countries to then implement some law or requirement of their people to have this right. In fact, this is again just a declaration, and in fact, um, it's just a resolution from the General Assembly. It's just declaring we believe that everyone shall have this right, and you can see here this is the resolution of the General Assembly back in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then it just comes here and says the General Assembly proclaims that this is a common standard of achievement. But again, it doesn't, there's nothing here requiring any state to do anything. So then now what we need to do is we go into the next phase. We go into actual promises, contracts. They're called in the United Nations, they call them covenants or conventions, where the states actually uh, promise to do certain things, and their own governments ratify these treaties and covenants, and then actually it starts to get implemented on a more local basis. So now let's take a look at some of these treaties. And here is a website on the United Nations that has a listing of all the core international human rights instruments. There's actually 9 of them, and they're all listed here. This looks like more than 9 because actually these are some optional protocols or addendums to each of the 9, or actually not all 9 have addendums, but some of them have more than one addendum. And so that's why it looks like more than 9. But there's actually 9. Here's the first one, the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Here's one on civil and political rights, economic, social, cultural rights, of the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, Convention Against Torture, Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, Convention on the Rights of the Child, protection of the rights of all migrant workers, members of their families, protection of all persons from enforced disappearance, and the rights of persons with disabilities. These make up the 9 core human rights instruments. And we're going to take a look at this one right here, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Yeah. So this is something that actually state parties have signed, and so they promise to do everything in here. And one of them is, I believe it's Article 26, 26, 28. It's 28. And state parties recognize the right of the child to education. With a view to achieving this right progressively and on the basis of equal opportunity, they shall, in particular, make primary education compulsory and available free to all. There it is. So they took the Universal Declaration, which is just a statement to the world that we believe that education should be free and compulsory for all children. And then now in this, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, state parties, whoever signs this and has it ratified, they agree that they will make primary education compulsory and available free to all. And in fact, we can take a look at who has ratified this by country. And indeed, if we come over to Mongolia, this part of the website is nice. They show you every member state and the status of each human rights instrument. And we go to Convention of the Rights of the Child right here, and we can see that Mongolia has actually signed it in 1990, and their government has ratified it in 1990 as well. So that's the Convention on the Rights of the Child. That one was adopted by the United Nations in 1989. Actually, the United Nations adopted an earlier human rights instrument called the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, where this provision for compulsory education, free compulsory education, was already instituted in a human rights convention. In this one, Article 13, the states party to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to education, and they recognize that with a view to achieving the full realization of this right, primary education shall be compulsory and available free to all. And in fact, so this one was done earlier in 1966. And if we take a look at Mongolia and when they ratified it, Mongolia ratified this one, the Covenant on Economic Social in 1968. They signed it, and the government ratified in 1974. So there you have it. You've got two human rights instruments which require member states to provide free compulsory education for children. Here's an interesting note about these two human rights instruments. There's actually one country on earth that has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that is the United States. The United States actually helped draft it, and they submitted a bunch of provisions which ultimately were memorialized in the convention, yet they have not signed it. And here is the Convention on the Rights of the Child right here. And the United States did sign it in 1995, but we have not ratified it. And then the other one, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, again signed in 77 and have not ratified it. In fact, you can see a bunch of these, all that say NA. United States has not ratified a lot of these core human rights instruments. I found an article here that talks about it from Sarah Mehta, Senior Policy Counsel at the ACLU, and she writes that that in fact that United States has not signed it. One of the things she says that the dangerous thing about it is that the United States remains the only country in the world to sentence children to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which would be prohibited under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but the United States has not signed it. So we have about 2,500 people currently serving a sentence for crimes they were involved in years ago as children. So that's just interesting to note. Yet the government has not ratified it. And here is the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. U.S. signed it in 1977 but has not ratified. and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The United States signed it in 1995, but has yet to ratify. So now we have Mongolia. They have signed and ratified these conventions, promising free compulsory education to their children. So now, what is what is incentivizing them? What is requiring them, guaranteeing that they will provide it to the children of their country? Well, there's really nothing in these treaties that institute any kind of monetary fines or any type of punishments. It's just basically we're taking them at their word that, and other countries as well, that they will institute it. Um, the only thing I can really see that's kind of like a form of punishment is shame. Like if they do not institute it, there are reports and hearings and meetings, and other countries criticize the countries and they make it public. That's the only thing I can see that's helping to guarantee that these rights are instituted within the country. And the way they do it with these particular instruments is through the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. And that Human Rights Council, if we look at the UN system, you've got the UN principal organs, these six: General Assembly, Security Council, Economic and Social Council, Secretariat, International Court of Justice, Trusteeship Council, which no longer exists. But one of the principal organs is the General Assembly, and a subsidiary organ of the General Assembly is the Human Rights Council. All right, and what is the Human Rights Council? Well, if we go to their website, they proclaim themselves to be an intergovernmental body within the United Nations system responsible for strengthening the promotion and protection of human rights around the globe and for addressing situations of human rights violations and making recommendations on them. So what's really interesting about them is part of their activities. One of their activities that they do almost like on a daily basis is this thing called the Universal Periodic Review. And if we look here at their activities, you can see it right here. The Universal Periodic Review is a unique peer review of the human rights records of UN member states by other member states. I just discovered this, and this is quite an amazing feat as to what they do. This Universal Periodic Review is going to review each and every one of the 193 member states, their human rights records. And it's quite a monumental task what they do. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So the Universal Periodic Review, it is one of the bodies of the Human Rights Council. Come here, we can go to the main web page, Universal Periodic Review. And what is it? So they describe themselves as a unique mechanism of the Human Rights Council that calls for each UN member state to undergo a peer review of its human rights records every 4.5 years. So they started in 2008. All 193 member states have been reviewed 3 times. They're actually now on their 4th cycle, which started in November of 2022, a year ago. And the good thing about this website too is that they provide it by country. So we can click here and we'll see that all 193 countries are listed here, and you can go into each one. So let's go to Mongolia. And here they've organized their Mongolia UPR website into the 3 cycles. First cycle, this was done back in 2010. Second cycle, 2015. And the third cycle, the latest one for Mongolia, was done in 2020. Each cycle has 3 reports that they review and consider. The first one is the national report, which is basically the information that the country itself puts forth. The second one is a compilation of UN information. So you have UN bodies that are doing their own research, and they provide information on the human rights record for the past cycle. And then finally, the third document is a summary of the stakeholders' information, which is outside organizations, those nonprofit NGOs that are observing the country and providing their own opinion. So let's take a quick look here at the UN information. This is the report from UN bodies such as the UNESCO. And if we just do a quick search for right to education, we'll see that we have some information here. Here we go. So, according to UNESCO, Mongolia achieved impressive enrollment rates at the primary level, but by upper secondary level, the completion rate dropped to 63%. Um, and further on, it says UNESCO encouraged Mongolia to provide sufficient resources to state-run boarding schools, which are important for the education of herder children. So here we go. This ties right into our video showing the tsaatan people. So it looks like UNESCO has done their own research and they've decided that maybe Mongolia has to provide more money to those state-run boarding schools because of the herder children. So in our video, we saw that that family had to take their child to a village, and that I guess was the boarding school. Um, so this is the UNESCO saying that more resources need to go into that. If we go back, we can take a look at, and here's another one of the three reports. This is the summary of stakeholders. So these are the outside entities doing research on Mongolia. And if we look at the right to education here, we'll see that there's been a submission, and then it affirmed that the state budget and investment in education had been substantially increased in order to enroll all children in kindergartens and primary and secondary schools. So this is an outside entity saying it appears as though Mongolia is abiding by their commitments in those human rights instruments. And this joint submission, we can see actually who submitted it, and it's JS1, and it's a joint submission one submitted by All for Education, National Civil Society, Coalition Mongolia, and UB Mongolia. Finally, with the UPR, I want to just show you about the shame factor that I was talking about, how the governments, how the United Nations get the member states to comply. And this is one of the meetings that they have. I believe they're all done in Geneva, and there's several meetings for each country during the cycle. And I believe this is the final one, and this is one that was done recently for Russia, and this was done November 17th, 2023. Just wanted to show you a sample of that.
All recommendations devoted to these themes we will be rejecting. President, I'd like to underscore that in Russia, promotion and protection of human rights is a top priority for the authorities at all levels, notwithstanding the unprecedented sanctions pressure exerted on our country and attempts to force it to eschew conducting sovereign internal and foreign policy. We will continue to consistently fine-tune the existing legal mechanisms and law enforcement practice in that sphere in view of the realities and challenges on the ground.
So just wanted to show you a sample. What you don't see there are other countries that have the chance to get up and speak and either maybe criticize, make recommendations, or maybe even compliment a country and their record on human rights. There's also those meetings that the UPR has. So to sum up, if we hear about a child in any country who's required to go to school, it's most likely because that country has acceded to ratified these international human rights conventions, which talk about or require the contracting parties to provide compulsory free education to children. Of course, it's not necessarily the case because the United States has not, but they still require children to go to school. And we looked at the how does the United Nations then mm, um, push or influence or cajole the contracting parties to implement that provision, and that's generally through the Universal Periodic Review. That's at least one way, where every 4.5 years a member state will have their human rights record reviewed, and there will be public hearings in other countries and NGOs, UN bodies. They will provide reports, their opinions, recommendations, criticisms of that country, and that's known to the world. And that's, I suppose, shame could help somewhat, but of course, a country can always reclaim its sovereignty and just maybe even withdraw from the convention, which of course we don't want. But that's a possibility. Um, so there you have it. Thank you.